I lost my job 3 weeks before my 63rd birthday. 2 days later, the bank warned me they might take my house, and when I finally gathered enough pride to ask my wealthy son for help, he looked at me in front of his millionaire friends and said, "Mom, you can't stay here. You'll ruin everything I built." I stood there in Ethan's glass penthouse overlooking Chicago, clutching my old suitcase, while his girlfriend stared at me like I didn't belong in the building. In that moment, I realized something far more painful than losing my job. Somewhere along the way, my son had become ashamed of me. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd really love to hear from you. Have you ever been hurt by someone you sacrificed everything for? And where are you watching from tonight? I always read your comments because they remind me none of us are truly alone in these stories. If this kind of emotional family drama speaks to you, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep sharing these journeys together. Before everything fell apart, my life was painfully ordinary. And honestly, I used to think ordinary was a blessing. I lived in a small brick house on the west side of Cleveland, Ohio. The paint on the porch railings had started peeling years ago, and one of the kitchen drawers never closed properly, no matter how many times my late husband tried fixing it before he got sick. The house wasn't beautiful, but it held my entire life inside it. Every photograph on those walls carried a memory. Every scratch in the hardwood floor had a story. I had worked at Lakeview Freight Logistics for 32 years. 32. Long enough to watch computers replace filing cabinets. Long enough to train managers young enough to be my grandchildren. Long enough for the building to feel more familiar than my own home some days. My office was small, beige walls, artificial plants, a coffee mug with faded sunflowers on it, but it was mine. I handled scheduling payroll corrections, shipment records, and every emergency nobody else wanted to deal with. People used to joke that the company would collapse if I ever retired. Funny how quickly people become replaceable. Most mornings I woke up at 5:30. I made coffee in the same old machine Michael bought me 15 years ago. Then I sat quietly at the kitchen table for a few minutes before work, listening to the furnace rattle while the Ohio winter pressed against the windows. That quiet used to comfort me. After Michael died, silence became something heavier. My husband had been gone for almost 15 years, but grief doesn't really disappear. It just changes shape. Some days it sits quietly beside you. Other days it crawls into bed with you at 3 a.m. and reminds you of every person you've lost. Michael had died from pancreatic cancer at 54. Too young. Much too young. During his final months, I worked double shifts while taking care of him at night. I still remember sleeping upright in hospital chairs, waking every few minutes whenever he coughed. Even then, Michael worried more about Ethan and me than himself. "Promise me something," he whispered one night in the hospital. I held his hand carefully because the chemotherapy had made his skin paper thin. Anything. Don't let Ethan give up on his dreams because of me. That was Michael. Dying. And still thinking about our son. Ethan was only 23 then. Brilliant. Ambitious. Restless. He had ideas constantly pouring out of him faster than the world could keep up. Back then, he still looked at me with warmth in his eyes. He used to call every Sunday. He used to ask if I'd eaten dinner. He used to say, "One day I'm going to take care of you, Mom. You'll see." And for years I believed him. After Michael passed away, Ethan got accepted into a technology incubator program in Chicago. It was an incredible opportunity, but we had no money left. Cancer had swallowed almost everything we had. I still remember sitting alone at the kitchen table with stacks of unpaid bills spread in front of me while Ethan slept upstairs. I quietly removed my wedding ring. The gold felt warm in my palm. That ring had survived 28 years of marriage. I sold it the next morning. Ethan never knew. Actually, there were many things Ethan never knew. He never knew I took overnight cleaning jobs 3 times a week while still working full-time at Lakeview. He never knew I skipped meals sometimes so he wouldn't worry about money. He never knew I canceled my dream of opening a small bookstore cafe because his tuition payments came first. And he never knew how many nights I sat in my car outside our house, crying from exhaustion before forcing myself to smile when I walked inside. Because mothers do that. We protect our children from the ugliness of sacrifice. For a while, it felt worth it. Ethan's startup began growing fast. Investors noticed him. Tech magazines started mentioning his name. Then came interviews, conferences, luxury suits, networking events. Success wrapped itself around my son slowly at first, then all at once. The phone calls became shorter. "Sorry, Mom, I'm busy. I'll call you next week." You know how crazy things are right now. Sometimes he forgot birthdays. Sometimes he sent expensive flowers instead of visiting for Christmas. At first, I defended him. "Oh, he's building a company. Oh, he's under pressure. Oh, he works very hard. But deep down, something had changed. I noticed it most in the way Ethan spoke now. Everything became about value, efficiency, image, status. One Thanksgiving, he visited wearing a watch that probably cost more than my yearly salary. He spent half the dinner texting investors while I reheated the turkey twice. When I asked if he was sleeping enough, he barely looked up from his phone. I don't really have time to slow down anymore, Mom. Not cruel, not yet. Just distant. Like someone slowly drifting out to sea while pretending they could still hear you from shore. At work, my closest friend Marianne noticed the sadness before I admitted it to myself. Marianne worked in accounting and had the kind of blunt honesty that only comes from surviving hard years. One day she told me quietly in the break room, "You're going to stop making excuses for him." I laughed awkwardly. "He's just busy." "No," she said gently, "he's changing." That sentence stayed with me longer than I wanted, because I already feared it was true. Still, every time Ethan mailed me designer handbags or expensive kitchen appliances I never asked for, I convinced myself those gifts meant love. Even when they arrived without handwritten notes, even when months passed without hearing his voice. I clung to small things. A 2-minute voicemail. A quick "love you, Mom" at the end of rushed conversations. A blurry selfie he once sent from a rooftop party in Manhattan. I told myself successful people simply lived differently, but loneliness has a way of whispering uncomfortable truths during quiet nights, especially after 60, especially when your body aches more than it used to, especially when you begin realizing the people you sacrificed everything for are building lives that no longer have room for you. Still, I never imagined Ethan would become ashamed of me. Not then, not yet. Back then, I still believed that if life ever became difficult, my son would remember who stood beside him when he had nothing. I had no idea how wrong I was about to be. The day I lost my job began like every other Tuesday. Cold coffee, gray skies, an ache in my lower back that never fully went away anymore. I arrived at Lakeview Freight Logistics 10 minutes early as usual. The parking lot shimmered with leftover rain, and the wind coming off Lake Erie cut through my coat sharper than expected. I remember standing there for a moment looking at the building, feeling strangely uneasy, almost like my body already knew something my mind didn't. Inside, the office felt different. Too quiet. People avoided eye contact. Clusters of employees whispered near printers and coffee machines before suddenly going silent when someone walked past. The tension in the air sat heavy against my skin. Then I saw Marianne. The moment our eyes met, my stomach dropped. She looked pale. "Leslie," she said softly, hurrying toward me. "Have they called you upstairs yet?" Called me where her expression answered before her words did. The HR conference room. I felt cold all over. For months, rumors had spread about the company being acquired by a larger corporation based in Texas. Management kept reassuring everyone that no major changes were coming, but people my age know how corporate language works. No major changes usually means disaster is already planned. I tried to stay calm. I placed my purse at my desk, carefully smoothed my sweater, and told myself not to panic. After 32 years, surely they wouldn't throw me away like nothing. Surely loyalty still mattered somewhere. 10 minutes later, an email appeared on my screen. "Please report to conference room B at 9 a.m. No explanation, no signature, just that. I walked upstairs feeling like I was marching toward something inevitable. Inside the conference room sat a young man I'd never seen before. Maybe 30 years old. Perfect haircut, expensive shoes, a corporate smile that never reached his eyes. Beside him sat Denise from Human Resources. Denise looked uncomfortable. The young man stood and extended his hand. "Leslie Cook, I'm Aaron Whitmore from Transitional Management." Transitional Management. What a polite way to say executioner. I sat down slowly. Aaron folded his hands on the table. "As you know, Lakeview Freight Logistics is restructuring operations under new leadership." I barely heard the rest at first. Words floated around me like static. Restructuring, optimization, modernization, operational efficiency. Then finally, unfortunately, your position has been eliminated. Eliminated. Not retired. Not honored. Eliminated. Like I was a broken machine. I stared at him for several seconds, waiting for the sentence to stop sounding unreal. "I've worked here 32 years, I said quietly. Aaron gave a rehearsed nod. "And we appreciate your service." Service? As if I were leaving the military instead of losing the only stability I had left. Denise slid a folder toward me. Severance information, healthcare termination dates, retirement transition options. I opened the folder with trembling hands. The severance package was insulting. 3 months. 3 months after giving them over half my life. I don't understand, I whispered. My performance reviews have always been excellent. Aaron shifted slightly in his seat. This decision is not performance-based. Of course it wasn't. It was age. It was salary. It was cheaper to replace me with 2 younger employees willing to work weekends for half the pay. They just weren't allowed to say it out loud. I looked around the room suddenly desperate for humanity, for compassion, for something. Denise's eyes filled briefly with guilt before dropping to the table. Nobody fought for me. Nobody stopped this. After signing paperwork I barely read, I walked downstairs in a daze. The office buzzed quietly around me while I emptied 32 years of my life into a cardboard box, a sunflower mug, family photos, pens, sticky notes, a cardigan I kept for cold mornings. I noticed several younger employees pretending not to watch me. One girl near the copier looked genuinely upset. Another whispered, "That's so wrong." But nobody said it loudly. Fear keeps people silent. Marianne helped carry my box to the parking lot. The moment we reached my car, I broke. Not graceful tears, not quiet sadness. I mean the kind of crying that shakes your entire body. "I don't know what I'm going to do," I whispered. Marianne hugged me tightly. "You'll figure it out." But even she sounded uncertain. Because women our age know the truth nobody likes admitting. Once you pass 60, the world starts treating you like expired inventory. Over the next few weeks, I applied everywhere. Reception jobs, administrative work, retail, medical offices, anything. Every interview felt the same. Smiling younger managers asking careful questions while already deciding I was too old. "You have wonderful experience." "Leslie, we decided to move in another direction. We're seeking a better cultural fit." One hiring manager actually asked if I'd be comfortable learning modern technology. I wanted to laugh. I had trained half the managers at Lakeview, but all they saw were wrinkles, gray hair, age, days blurred together after that. I stopped sleeping properly. I started calculating groceries while walking through stores, bread or medication, gas bill or phone bill. One afternoon, I stood in my kitchen staring at a can of soup and realized I was trying to decide whether I could stretch it into 2 meals. That moment humiliated me more than losing my job. I began selling small things quietly. Jewelry, an old silver serving tray Michael's mother gave us, my vintage record player. I even sold Michael's watch eventually. That one nearly destroyed me. The healthcare situation terrified me most. At my age, losing insurance feels dangerous. One medical emergency can erase everything. I developed chest tightness from stress but ignored it because I couldn't afford a doctor anymore. Still, I never told Ethan, not once. Every time I picked up the phone, shame stopped me. I didn't want my son thinking I had failed. Besides, Ethan always sounded distracted lately anyway. One evening he called while stepping into a car somewhere. I could hear traffic and people talking around him. "Hey, Mom can't talk long," I almost told him then. I almost said I lost my job. I'm scared. I don't know how much longer I can keep this house. But before I could speak, he interrupted. "Did you get the espresso machine I sent?" I looked at the unopened luxury coffee machine, still sitting in its box on my counter. "Yes," I lied softly. "It's lovely. Good." "Listen, I've got another meeting. Love you." Then he hung up. I sat there staring at the silent phone for a long time afterward. Love shouldn't feel that empty. The final blow came 3 weeks later. A certified letter from the bank arrived on a Thursday morning. Final notice. If payment was not received within 30 days, foreclosure proceedings could begin. My hands shook so badly I dropped the envelope onto the kitchen floor. I remember sinking slowly into a chair while the house around me felt unbearably quiet. The same house where Ethan took his first steps. The same kitchen where Michael danced with me barefoot at midnight once because our radio played our wedding song unexpectedly. The idea of losing it physically hurt. That night, I walked room to room touching walls like I was saying goodbye to someone dying. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to think something I never thought a mother should. Maybe I needed help. Maybe I couldn't survive this alone anymore. I barely slept that night. At 4 a.m, I finally sat at the kitchen table and bought a bus ticket to Chicago. I had not traveled by bus in almost 20 years. The station in Cleveland smelled like burnt coffee, wet pavement, and exhaustion. People sat slumped over duffel bags beneath harsh fluorescent lights, while televisions mounted in the corners played morning news nobody seemed to watch. I arrived carrying one faded blue suitcase and a cardboard storage box held together with old packing tape. That box contained the pieces of my life I couldn't bear to leave behind. Family photographs, old birthday cards Ethan made as a child, a few documents, and Michael's brown wool coat folded carefully on top. The coat still smelled faintly like cedar and aftershave if I pressed my face close enough. I hadn't planned to bring it, but something about leaving home that morning made me afraid I might never truly return. As I waited for boarding, I kept rehearsing what I would say to Ethan. I don't need much, just a little time, just until I get back on my feet. Every version sounded humiliating. Parents spend their whole lives protecting their children from fear. Asking your child for help feels unnatural somehow, like the world has tilted the wrong direction. The bus ride to Chicago lasted almost 8 hours. I barely slept. Rain streaked across the windows while highways stretched endlessly through gray winter landscapes. Small towns passed by in silence. Empty gas stations, frozen fields, rusted factory buildings that reminded me too much of Cleveland. America looks loneliest in winter. Around midnight, the woman beside me offered half of her sandwich with a tired smile. "You headed home or leaving home?" she asked casually. I almost answered truthfully, "I'm not sure anymore." Instead, I smiled politely and said, "Visiting family." Family. The word hurt unexpectedly. By the time the Chicago skyline appeared through the foggy bus windows, my back ached terribly. Massive glass buildings towered over the streets like another world entirely. Everything looked polished, fast, expensive. Ethan belonged here now, not in Cleveland. Not in our old neighborhood where snow piled against cracked sidewalks and everyone still knew each other's names. I stepped off the bus, clutching my coat tighter around me as cold wind whipped through downtown Chicago. Taxis splashed through puddles while sharply dressed people hurried past without looking at one another. For a moment, I considered turning around. Maybe I could still fix things alone somehow. Maybe asking for help had been a mistake. Then I remembered the foreclosure letter sitting on my kitchen counter. I remembered the empty refrigerator. I remembered waking up at night terrified of getting sick because I no longer had insurance. So I forced myself forward. The ride to Ethan's building cost nearly $40. I stared out the taxi window the entire way, watching luxury stores and gleaming restaurants slide past. Everything in Chicago seemed made of glass and money. When we finally stopped, I looked up slowly. Ethan's building didn't even feel real. The skyscraper stretched high into the clouds with sleek black windows and gold lighting glowing from inside. A uniformed doorman stood beneath heated awnings while luxury cars lined the curb. I suddenly became painfully aware of my shoes. The soles were worn thin, my coat was outdated. My suitcase looked ancient beside polished designer luggage passing through the lobby. "You sure this is the right address?" the driver asked. I nodded quietly. My son lives here. Even thinking it felt strange. Inside the lobby gleamed with marble floors and enormous crystal light fixtures. Soft piano music floated through hidden speakers somewhere overhead. Everything smelled expensive. The receptionist glanced at me politely, but I caught the quick flicker in her eyes. Confusion. Maybe suspicion. People like me didn't belong there. "I'm here to see Ethan Cook," I said softly. The receptionist typed something into her computer. "Do you have an appointment?" "Appointment. With my own son." "No," I admitted. "I'm his mother." That changed her expression immediately. Not warmth exactly. More like surprise. She called upstairs while I stood there holding my suitcase with both hands. A minute later, she gave a tight smile. "You can go up." The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors finally opened, I stepped directly into Ethan's penthouse. And for several seconds, I couldn't breathe. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire Chicago skyline. The living room alone was larger than my entire first floor back home. White marble countertops gleamed beneath hanging gold lights. Abstract paintings covered the walls. Everything looked cold. Beautiful, but cold. I heard laughter somewhere deeper inside the apartment. Then heels clicking across hardwood floors. A woman appeared around the corner holding a wine glass. Tall, perfect blonde hair, cream silk outfit. The kind of beauty that looked expensive to maintain. She stopped abruptly when she saw me. For one uncomfortable moment, her eyes traveled over my coat, my suitcase, my tired face. "Oh," she said slowly. "I'm sorry, housekeeping usually comes through the service entrance." I froze. The humiliation hit so fast, I physically felt it. Before I could answer, Ethan appeared behind her. And for one brief second, my son looked genuinely shocked. "Mom." His voice wasn't happy. It was alarmed. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly. Ethan glanced immediately toward the open dining area behind him. Several men in suits sat around a long table covered with laptops, cocktails, and paperwork. One of them looked up curiously. Ethan lowered his voice instantly. "What are you doing here?" Not "Mom, are you okay?" Not Why didn't you call? Just what are you doing here? The woman beside him blinked awkwardly. Oh my God, she said with a small laugh. You're Ethan's mom. Something about the way she said it made my chest tighten, like she expected someone different. Someone polished, someone wealthier. Ethan rubbed his jaw nervously. Mom, this is Sabrina. I smiled weakly. Nice to meet you. Sabrina gave a quick air kiss near my cheek without actually touching me. Her perfume smelled like expensive flowers, behind Ethan. One of the businessmen called out jokingly, Ethan, you hiding family from us. Everyone laughed lightly, but Ethan didn't. His entire body looked tense, embarrassed, ashamed. And suddenly I realized something devastating. My son wasn't worried about me. He was worried about how I looked standing inside his perfect luxury world. Ethan stepped closer and lowered his voice further. You should have called first. I know I whispered. I needed to see you. He glanced again toward his guests. The movement was quick, but I noticed it. That tiny flash of panic in his eyes, as if my presence alone threatened something fragile he'd spent years building. I'm in the middle of something important, he muttered. I looked around the enormous penthouse again, at the skyline, the polished marble, the champagne bottles, the strangers in $1,000 suits, and standing there with rainwater still damp on my coat, I suddenly felt smaller than I ever had in my entire life. Ethan led me away from the dining area quickly, like he was trying to contain a problem before anyone noticed. The further we walked into the penthouse, the more unreal everything felt. A hallway lined with modern art led toward a private sitting room overlooking the city. Even the silence sounded expensive there. The moment we were alone, Ethan exhaled sharply. Mom, what is this? I stared at him for a second, confused by the irritation in his voice. What do you mean? You just showed up here out of nowhere. His eyes flicked toward my suitcase. And with luggage. The words landed harder than he realized. I suddenly remembered another moment years earlier, Ethan at 7 years old, running into my arms after school with a missing tooth and grass stains on his jeans. Back then, seeing me made him light up. Now he looked cornered. I swallowed carefully. I didn't know what else to do. Ethan rubbed both hands over his face impatiently. You could have called first. I tried twice last week. You know how busy I've been. There it was again. Busy. Always busy. As if that explained everything, I looked down at my hands because I suddenly couldn't bear looking directly at him anymore. I lost my job, Ethan. For the first time since I arrived, he went quiet. Outside the giant windows behind him, snow began drifting slowly across the Chicago skyline. My company was bought out, I continued softly. They let a lot of us go. Ethan's expression shifted slightly then. Not heartbreak, not concern, calculation. How bad is it? I hated that question immediately. Not, are you okay? Not, what happened? Just how bad is it? I forced myself to answer anyway. I've been trying to find work, but I laughed weakly. Nobody really wants to hire a 62-year-old woman anymore. He stayed silent. My insurance is gone too, I admitted. And the bank. My voice cracked slightly. They may take the house. Saying the words aloud made the situation suddenly feel horrifyingly real. Ethan looked away toward the windows. I could almost see his mind working. Numbers, risk, inconvenience. Finally, I whispered the thing I had spent the entire bus ride dreading. I just need a little time. He turned back toward me slowly. What does that mean? I was hoping maybe I could stay here for a few weeks until I figure things out. The silence that followed felt endless. Ethan blinked once, then twice. Almost like he genuinely couldn't process what I'd said. Stay here, I nodded quickly. I wouldn't get in your way. I could sleep anywhere. The couch is fine. Mom. His tone sharpened instantly. You can't stay here. The sentence hit so fast, my body physically stiffened. Oh. I looked down at the floor, suddenly embarrassed for even asking. I just thought I have investors coming in and out constantly. He interrupted. Meetings, events. People from the company staying here sometimes. I understand, I said quietly, though I wasn't sure I did. Ethan paced a few steps away before lowering his voice again. You don't understand how important things are right now. Something inside me began sinking. What does that mean? It means everything is moving very fast, he snapped. There's a major acquisition happening. I can't have distractions. Distractions? That's what I was now, not his mother. A distraction. I tried one last time. I don't need much, Ethan. Honestly, Just a little help getting back on my feet. He stared at me with growing frustration. Why didn't you save more money? The question stunned me. I looked at him slowly. Excuse me, I mean you worked your whole life. I actually laughed then. Not because anything was funny, because the cruelty of the question felt unreal. Your father got cancer. Ethan crossed his arms. A lot of people go through hard things, Mom. I stared at him in disbelief. This couldn't be my son. Not really. I worked 2 jobs after your father died. I know. I sacrificed everything to keep us afloat. I know. Then how can you ask me why I didn't save more money? For one brief second, guilt flashed across his face, then disappeared. Look, he said softer now. I'm sorry you're struggling. I really am. But you can't depend on me to solve your life. My life, as if my entire existence had somehow become separate from his. As if the woman standing in front of him hadn't built every piece of stability he ever stood on. A voice interrupted us then. Sabrina entered carrying her wine glass. Everything about her posture screamed annoyance masked as politeness. Is everything okay? She asked lightly. Ethan answered too quickly. Yeah? Fine. But Sabrina's eyes immediately landed on my suitcase beside the chair, and she understood. Oh, she said slowly. That one word carried judgment inside it. I felt heat crawl up my neck. Sabrina sat elegantly on the arm of Ethan's chair and crossed her legs. I know this is difficult, she began carefully, but healthy boundaries are important. Healthy boundaries. I nearly smiled from disbelief. This woman probably had never worried about losing a home in her life. I'm not trying to cause problems, I said quietly. Of course not, Sabrina replied. But Ethan's under enormous pressure right now. People depend on him. People. Apparently, mothers no longer counted. Ethan walked toward the kitchen counter and opened a drawer. When he returned, he held several $100 bills folded in his hand. He extended them toward me awkwardly. There, he said. This should help for now. I stared at the money. The gesture felt less like love and more like paying someone to disappear. I'm not asking for charity. It's not charity. Then what is it? Ethan sighed heavily. It's me helping the best way I can. No, I whispered. The best way you could help would be letting me stay with my son. Sabrina looked uncomfortable now. Ethan's jaw tightened immediately. Mom, please don't make this emotional. The sentence cut deeper than everything else. Please don't make this emotional. As if emotions were inappropriate between a mother and child. I looked at him, then really looked at him. The tailored black sweater, the expensive watch, the coldness carefully hidden beneath polished professionalism. And suddenly I realized success had not simply changed my son. It had erased parts of him. I see, I said quietly. Ethan exhaled with visible relief, assuming the conversation was over. I picked up my suitcase slowly. Sabrina glanced toward the dining room where laughter echoed faintly again. Ethan walked me toward the elevator without touching me once. At the door, he pressed the folded cash into my hand again. This time I took it. Not because I wanted it, because I suddenly understood something painful. My son needed this moment to feel transactional. If he admitted I was his mother in that moment, truly admitted it, then he would have to confront the kind of man he had become. As the elevator doors opened, Ethan finally spoke again. I can't let this ruin everything. I froze. What exactly is everything? Ethan? He didn't answer, and somehow his silence hurt even more. The elevator doors closed between us. I stood there alone, clutching my suitcase while tears blurred the shining lights of Chicago beneath me. Then quietly I looked down at the money in my hand. And for the first time in my life, I felt ashamed of my own child. Chicago looked crueler in the rain. By the time I stepped out of Ethan's building, icy water soaked through the edges of my shoes, and wind pushed hard against my coat. Luxury cars glided past me, while people hurried beneath umbrellas without noticing the older woman standing alone on the sidewalk, holding a battered suitcase. For several seconds I couldn't move. My chest hurt in a way I couldn't explain. Not dramatic pain, not anger, something quieter. The feeling of finally understanding a truth you spent years avoiding. I looked up once toward the glowing windows of Ethan's penthouse high above the city. Somewhere up there, my son had already returned to his wealthy guests and polished conversations. And down on the street, I suddenly felt like a stranger to him. I walked aimlessly for almost 20 minutes before ducking into a small diner near the river. The place looked old and tired in the comforting way family diners often do. Red vinyl booths, scratched counters, A waitress refilling coffee cups without asking first. Nobody cared what I looked like there. Nobody stared at my worn coat. A gray-haired waitress pointed toward a booth near the back. "Sit wherever you want, honey." Honey? Such a small word. But after the coldness in Ethan's penthouse, I nearly cried hearing it. I slid into the booth carefully and placed my suitcase beside me. My hands were trembling slightly from cold and exhaustion. The waitress brought coffee without asking. "You okay, sweetheart?" That question almost broke me completely. Because unlike Ethan, she actually sounded like she cared about the answer. I forced a smile. "Long day. Ain't that life?" She muttered sympathetically before walking away. Outside, the rain streaked against the windows while jazz music played softly somewhere behind the counter. For the first time all day, silence surrounded me. No polished marble, no judgment, no pretending. Just me, and the terrible emptiness sitting inside my chest. I reached down slowly and pulled the cardboard storage box from my suitcase. The tape along the edges had started peeling. For years I kept those memories packed away, because looking at them hurt too much after Michael died. Tonight I suddenly needed reminding that my life had once meant something. I lifted the lid carefully. The first photograph on top showed Ethan at age 5 sitting on Michael's shoulders during a 4th of July parade. Both of them smiling so widely it physically hurt to look at now. Beneath it sat birthday cards written in crooked childish handwriting. "I love you, Mommy. Thank you for making pancakes. You're the best mom ever." I closed my eyes briefly. Where had that little boy gone? I kept digging through the box slowly. Old insurance papers, receipts, folders. Then my fingers touched something thicker. A large envelope. I frowned slightly, pulling it free. The front read Founding Documents, EC Digital Systems. My stomach tightened instantly. EC Digital Systems, Ethan's first startup. The original version of the company that eventually made him rich. I stared at the envelope in confusion. Why did I still have these? Then memory returned slowly. Years ago, Ethan had asked me to keep copies of some paperwork because he was moving apartments constantly while building the company. "Just hold on to them for me, Mom," he'd said back then. "You're more organized than I am." I opened the envelope carefully. Inside sat old contracts, early investment records, handwritten business plans, and banking paperwork from Ethan's startup years. Most of it meant nothing to me, at least initially. Then I saw a document with my own signature. I blinked. And another. And another. My pulse quickened. I spread the papers across the diner table slowly while confusion turned into something sharper. One document showed the original seed funding transfer into Ethan's company account, amount $48,000. My breath caught. $48,000. I remembered that money. God, I remembered every painful second of it. Flashbacks hit me so hard I almost felt dizzy. Michael sitting weakly at the kitchen table wrapped in blankets while medical bills piled beside us. Ethan pacing the room, talking excitedly about software systems and investors. The timing matters, Mom. If I miss this opportunity now, somebody else will build it first. Michael had looked terrified. We can't risk the house. But Ethan had kept pushing, begging, promising. I'll pay it all back, I swear. And eventually, I gave in. I sold my wedding ring. I emptied retirement savings. And worst of all, I refinanced our home. Our home. The same house now facing foreclosure. My hands started shaking harder. I flipped through more documents carefully. Then I found it. The original collateral agreement. My name sat directly beside Ethan's, not as a casual lender. As a founding financial guarantor, I stared at the paper for several long seconds. Surely this didn't matter anymore. The company had changed names years ago. Investors came later. Lawyers handled everything after that. Still, why had Ethan never asked for these back? I kept reading. Legal terminology blurred together until one paragraph caught my attention. Primary intellectual property assets remain tied to original founding guarantee structure unless formally released by all originating parties. I read it again, then again. My chest tightened. I didn't fully understand corporate law, but I understood enough to realize something important. Somehow, legally, I still existed inside the foundation of Ethan's empire. The waitress returned with pie I hadn't ordered. "You looked like you needed something sweet." I almost laughed. "Thank you." She glanced down at the mountain of papers scattered across the booth. "You doing taxes at midnight?" Something like that. Once she walked away, I continued reading more carefully. Another document listed early software patents connected to Ethan's original platform design. My signature appeared there too. Not ownership exactly, but involvement, protection, liability, and suddenly, pieces started fitting together in my mind. Ethan wasn't just embarrassed by me. He was afraid of something. That sentence in the penthouse echoed inside my head again. I can't let this ruin everything. At first, I thought he meant his image, his reputation, but now, maybe everything meant something much bigger. I leaned back slowly against the booth cushions while rain continued tapping softly against the diner windows. For hours after Ethan rejected me, I had felt powerless, small, disposable. But sitting there beneath fluorescent diner lights, surrounded by old paperwork and memories of sacrifice, another feeling slowly began replacing the pain. Clarity. Not revenge. Not yet. Just clarity. Because for the first time, I realized something my son had either forgotten or hoped I never discovered. His empire had not been built alone. It had been built on the back of every sacrifice I made. And somewhere deep inside those documents, proof still existed. I barely slept that night. The diner closed at 2 a.m, forcing me back out into the freezing Chicago streets, with my suitcase, my cardboard box, and 1,000 thoughts crashing through my mind. I found a cheap motel 3 blocks away. The room smelled faintly like cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. The wallpaper peeled near the ceiling, and the heater rattled loudly every few minutes like it might die at any second. But compared to the emptiness I felt leaving Ethan's penthouse, the little motel room somehow felt safer. At least nobody there looked ashamed of me. I spread the documents across the bed carefully and stared at them until sunrise. The more I read, the clearer one thing became. Ethan had never fully untangled my legal connection from the original company foundation. Maybe intentionally. Maybe accidentally. I honestly didn't know which possibility hurt more. Around 6 a.m, I finally reached for my phone. There was only one person I could think of. Gloria Bennett. I hadn't spoken to Gloria in almost 8 years, but once upon a time we had been inseparable. We met during community college in our 20s before life carried us in different directions. Back then, Gloria was already fierce. Sharp mind, sharp tongue, sharp instincts. While I built a family, Gloria built a legal career. By 60, she had become one of the most respected financial attorneys in Cleveland. I hesitated before calling. Then I remembered Ethan handing me money like I was a homeless stranger. I pressed dial. Gloria answered on the 3rd ring, sounding half awake and immediately irritated. This better not be a telemarketer because I'm too old to go to prison for murder. Despite everything, I laughed softly. There was a brief pause. Leslie, hearing warmth in someone's voice nearly made me cry again. Hi, Gloria. My God, she said instantly. What happened? That question, so simple, so human. And unlike Ethan, Gloria sounded afraid for me instead of inconvenienced by me. An hour later, I sat inside Gloria's downtown law office, clutching stale coffee, while snow drifted outside enormous windows overlooking Cleveland. Her office suited her perfectly. Elegant, but intimidating. Dark wood shelves lined with legal books, awards covering the walls, everything organized with military precision. Gloria sat across from me wearing glasses low on her nose, while reviewing the documents from Ethan's startup. At first, she looked merely curious, then focused, then deeply serious. Finally, she removed her glasses slowly. Leslie. The tone in her voice made my stomach tighten. What? She leaned back in her chair carefully. Do you understand what you have here? Not really. That makes 2 of us, she muttered. Because honestly, this paperwork is messy as hell. That sounded exactly like Gloria. Even after decades as an attorney, she still talked like someone's brutally honest older sister. She spread several papers across the desk. Your son's original company structure tied intellectual property rights to initial guarantor agreements. I blinked. Meaning, she said slowly, that when Ethan used your home as collateral and accepted your funding, he legally connected you to foundational company assets. I stared at her blankly. Gloria pointed toward one specific document. This signature right here matters more than I think Ethan realizes. A strange coldness spread through my chest. Could he lose the company? Gloria studied me carefully before answering. Potentially, yes. The words hit harder than expected. I should have felt satisfied after the way Ethan treated me. Instead, I felt sick. He worked hard for that company. So did you. I looked down immediately. No. Ethan built it. Gloria's expression sharpened. Leslie listened to me carefully. Women like us have a dangerous habit of erasing ourselves from our own stories. I stayed quiet. She continued. You mortgaged your home. You liquidated personal assets. You financially guaranteed early operations. Legally and morally, you were part of that foundation. Part of that foundation. Nobody had ever framed it that way before. Not even me. I had always described those years as helping my son, never building something beside him. Gloria kept examining paperwork. Then her face changed slightly. She slid another document toward me. Your son's current company acquisition. I frowned. What about it? It's happening soon. How do you know? Because Richard Sloan's investment group is all over financial news right now. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Gloria tapped the article on her tablet. They're preparing a massive purchase deal. Tens of millions at minimum. I suddenly remembered the businessmen sitting inside Ethan's penthouse. The tension, the expensive dinner, the panic in Ethan's eyes when I arrived unexpectedly. Oh my God, I whispered. Gloria nodded grimly. He's trying to close the biggest deal of his life. My chest tightened again, and suddenly Ethan's words echoed differently now. I can't let this ruin everything. Not embarrassment, not image, the acquisition. If legal questions surfaced about foundational ownership or intellectual property rights during negotiations, the entire deal could collapse. I looked up at Gloria quickly. I don't want to destroy him. Gloria folded her hands carefully. That's interesting. What is, even after what he did to you, your first instinct is still protecting him? I didn't answer, because she was right. A terrible part of me still wanted Ethan safe. Even after the humiliation, even after the rejection, that's the ugly truth about motherhood nobody talks about. Children can wound you deeply and still remain the center of your heart. Gloria softened slightly. I'm not saying we sue him tomorrow. Good. But Leslie, she leaned forward. You need to understand something important. Her eyes locked onto mine. If Ethan realizes these documents exist, he's going to panic. I swallowed. Why? Because investors hate uncertainty, especially legal uncertainty. She paused, and because I strongly suspect your son never disclosed the full origins of his company structure to everyone involved. The room suddenly felt colder. You think he hid this? I think ambitious people sometimes rewrite history when success arrives. That sentence sat heavily between us. Gloria stood and walked toward the window overlooking the snowy city streets. Do you know what the saddest part is? What he probably convinced himself he earned the right to forget your sacrifices. Tears burned behind my eyes instantly, because deep down, I feared she was right. Success had become Ethan's new identity, and people protecting fragile identities often bury uncomfortable truths. Gloria turned back toward me. So, here's the question. I braced myself. What do you want? The answer should have been simple. Money, security, justice. But none of those felt fully true. I wanted my son to care that I was hurting. My voice cracked badly on the last word. Gloria's face softened completely then. Oh, Leslie. Silence filled the office. Finally, I whispered, what happens now? Gloria returned to her desk slowly. Now we move carefully. She organized the documents into neat folders, because whether Ethan understands it or not, her expression darkened slightly. His entire empire may still rest on the shoulders of the woman he just threw away. 3 days passed before Ethan called me. Not to apologize, not to ask where I was staying, not to ask whether I had eaten, slept, or cried myself sick after he turned me away. He called because he was scared. I was sitting in Gloria's office reviewing more documents when my phone buzzed across the desk. Ethan. Just seeing his name still tightened something inside my chest. Gloria glanced at the screen. Well, she muttered dryly. Looks like the prince finally remembers his mother exists. I almost ignored the call. Almost. But mothers are weak in dangerous ways when it comes to their children. I answered quietly. Hello. Ethan's voice came immediately sharp and controlled. Did you meet with a lawyer? No greeting, no concern. Straight to fear. I closed my eyes briefly. Yes. A long silence followed. Then, why would you do that? The question stunned me. Why would I do that? As if I were the one behaving irrationally. Asking for legal advice isn't a crime, Ethan. You know exactly what this looks like. What does it look like? It looks like you're trying to cause problems right before a major acquisition. There it was. Finally. Not his mother's suffering. Not family. Business. Always business. I kept my voice calm. I didn't even know about the acquisition until yesterday. Another pause. Then his tone hardened. Who told you? That doesn't matter. It absolutely matters. I looked toward Gloria, who silently mouthed, Careful. Why are you so afraid, Ethan? His breathing changed slightly. I'm not afraid. Then why are you calling that question irritated him immediately? Because this situation could spiral into something ugly. I almost laughed. Ugly. He had abandoned his own mother in a luxury penthouse while she faced foreclosure. Ugly had already happened. Leslie, he said suddenly. The use of my first name instead of Mom chilled me. You need to understand something. Investors are extremely sensitive right now. If unnecessary legal confusion appears... Unnecessary, I interrupted softly. Silence. Then, you know what I mean. No, I whispered. Actually, I don't. For the first time, emotion cracked through his polished tone. You have no idea how hard I worked to build this company. The sentence hit me like ice water. Because suddenly I understood something horrifying. Ethan genuinely believed he built everything alone. All those years of sacrifice, the second jobs, the mortgage, the fear, the exhaustion. In his mind, those things had become invisible. I worked hard too, I said quietly. Another silence. Then Ethan exhaled sharply. What do you want? The question hurt more than I expected, because it revealed exactly how he saw me now. Not as his mother, as a threat requiring negotiation. I wanted my son, I whispered. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then his voice became cold again. I'm sending someone to meet you. What? He'll bring paperwork. My stomach tightened instantly. Paperwork for what? To clean this situation up, meaning erase me. I'm not signing anything. You haven't even read it yet. I don't need to. Ethan's patience snapped slightly. Do you understand how much money is involved here and there it was? The real Ethan, not the little boy who once cried because he accidentally broke my favorite coffee mug. Not the young man who hugged me after Michael's funeral and promised we would always take care of each other. This Ethan measured everything in dollars, even loyalty. I'll think about it, I said finally. That answer seemed to calm him slightly. Good. Then, after a brief pause, don't talk to anyone else until we handle this. Handle this. Like I was a legal inconvenience, not his mother. The call ended without either of us saying, I love you. I stared at the dark phone screen for a long time afterward. Gloria leaned back in her chair slowly. Well, she said, that sounded incredibly ominous. I swallowed hard. He sounded terrified. Good. Gloria replied bluntly. Maybe terror will accomplish what gratitude never did. I looked down immediately. I don't want to hurt him. Gloria sighed deeply. Leslie, at some point you need to stop confusing accountability with cruelty. Before I could answer, there was a knock at her office door. Her assistant stepped inside. There's a man downstairs asking for Leslie Cook. Gloria's eyebrows lifted. That was fast. 20 minutes later, I sat across from Ethan's assistant inside a quiet coffee shop near the law office. Tyler Reed looked younger than I expected, early 30s, neatly dressed, nervous. The kind of man who constantly checked his phone because somebody richer controlled his life. He placed a leather folder carefully on the table between us. Mr. Cook asked me to deliver these. I didn't touch the folder immediately. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. He also asked me to give you this. He slid an envelope toward me. Cash. A thick envelope full of it. I stared at the money silently. Does Ethan think throwing cash at people fixes everything? Tyler looked embarrassed. I'm just the messenger. I finally opened the folder. Inside sat legal documents written in dense corporate language. But the meaning became clear quickly. I would formally waive any present or future claims connected to Ethan's company, its intellectual property or financial structure. In exchange, a confidential settlement payment. My chest tightened. He was trying to buy my silence. Tyler cleared his throat carefully. It's actually very generous. I looked at him. Generous. He immediately regretted saying it. I just mean. His voice faded. Poor man. He probably delivered bad news for wealthy people every day. I closed the folder gently. I'm not signing this. Tyler looked genuinely alarmed. Mrs. Cook, I really think you should reconsider. Why? His eyes flickered nervously toward the windows. Because he knew more than he wanted to say. I leaned forward slightly. What's Ethan so afraid of? Tyler hesitated. Then, nothing. Too fast. Too rehearsed. Tyler. He froze slightly hearing his first name from me. I spent 32 years managing people. I know when someone's lying. He swallowed hard. I shouldn't talk about company matters. That wasn't my question. Another long pause. Then Tyler lowered his voice. The acquisition isn't as stable as people think. I stayed silent. That encouraged him to continue. There are cash flow problems. My stomach tightened. Meaning if the Sloan deal collapses? He exhaled shakily. A lot of things could unravel very quickly. Suddenly, Ethan's desperation made far more sense. This wasn't only about greed anymore. It was survival. Tyler rubbed his forehead anxiously. Mr. Cook's under enormous pressure. The old version of me almost defended Ethan automatically, but not this time. He was under no pressure when he abandoned his mother. Tyler looked down immediately, and that silence told me everything. He knew. People around Ethan knew exactly what kind of man he had become. I slowly closed the folder again. Tell Ethan something for me. Tyler looked up nervously. I'm listening. I met his eyes calmly. Tell my son I'm done being treated like a mistake he's trying to erase. Tyler said nothing after that. He simply gathered the untouched envelope of cash and left quietly. Once he disappeared through the coffee shop doors, Gloria, who had been sitting nearby pretending not to listen, walked over slowly. Well, she said softly, now we know. I looked up. Know what? Her expression hardened. Your son isn't just protecting his fortune anymore. She paused. He's protecting a collapsing empire. 2 nights later, Ethan invited me back to the Penthouse. That alone told Gloria everything she needed to know. He's panicking, she said immediately after I showed her the text message. The message itself sounded almost warm. Mom, let's stop escalating this. Come to dinner tomorrow night. We can talk privately and work things out like family. Family. Interesting how quickly that word returned once legal documents became involved. I sat quietly in Gloria's office rereading the message while unease crawled through my stomach. I don't trust this, I admitted. You shouldn't. Then maybe I shouldn't go? Gloria shook her head immediately. No, you absolutely should go. I looked up. Why? Because desperate people make mistakes. She leaned forward across her desk. And I have a feeling your son is becoming very desperate. The next evening, snow fell softly across Chicago as I stood once again in front of Ethan's skyscraper, but this time felt different. The first visit I arrived broken, ashamed, terrified. Now I arrived carrying something dangerous, the truth. I wore my nicest sweater despite the sleeves being slightly worn at the cuffs. Before leaving the motel, I spent 10 full minutes fixing my hair and applying lipstick with trembling hands. Not for Ethan, for myself. Because somewhere over the last few days, I realized humiliation only survives if you accept it. The doorman recognized me immediately this time. Good evening, Mrs. Cook. No suspicion now. Funny how quickly people's behavior changes once they realize you matter. Upstairs, the penthouse glowed with warm golden lighting and soft jazz music. A private dinner had been prepared beside the enormous windows overlooking Chicago. Crystal glasses, white candles, expensive wine. Everything elegant enough to look almost intimate. Almost. Sabrina greeted me first. Her smile looked carefully practiced. Leslie, she said warmly, you look wonderful. I nearly admired how quickly wealthy people could transform cruelty into politeness when necessary. Thank you. She touched my arm lightly. I'm really glad we can all sit down calmly tonight. Calmly, as though I had caused the tension instead of being abandoned during the worst moment of my life. Ethan appeared moments later wearing a charcoal gray suit without a tie. He looked exhausted beneath the polished exterior. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and tension pulled tightly around his mouth. For the first time since arriving in Chicago, my son looked afraid. Mom, he said softly. I nodded. Ethan. There was an awkward hesitation between us. Not quite hostility. Not quite love either, just damage. Sabrina guided us toward the dining table where another man already sat, reviewing papers beside a tablet computer. Late 50s. Silver hair, sharp, expensive suit, confident posture. The moment he looked up, I recognized him immediately from the business articles Gloria showed me. Richard Sloan, the investor. Ethan moved quickly. Mom, this is Richard Sloan. Richard stood politely and shook my hand. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Cook. Ethan speaks very highly of you. The lie landed heavily in my chest, but I smiled anyway. That's kind of him. Dinner began smoothly enough. too smoothly. Expensive food arrived in silent courses prepared by some private chef I never actually saw. Conversation stayed carefully shallow at first Chicago weather business travel restaurants. But beneath every polite smile, tension vibrated invisibly across the table. Ethan barely touched his wine. Sabrina kept watching him nervously, and Richard Sloane. Richard observed everything. The man had investor eyes. Cold eyes. Eyes trained to detect instability. Halfway through dinner, Richard excused himself to take a phone call on the terrace balcony. The second he disappeared outside, Ethan's entire demeanor changed. His shoulders tightened instantly. Sabrina reached for her wine glass but avoided eye contact, and Ethan pulled a folder from beside his chair. There it was. The real reason for dinner. He slid the folder toward me carefully. "Mom," he began quietly, "I want us to settle this privately." I didn't touch the folder. I thought this was dinner. "It is." "No," I said softly. "It's a negotiation." Ethan's jaw flexed slightly. "Please don't do this." That sentence irritated me more than I expected, as though I were creating conflict by refusing to disappear quietly. Sabrina leaned forward carefully. "Leslie, nobody wants things to become ugly." Ugly again. Interesting word choice. I looked directly at Ethan. "What exactly are you so afraid of?" He exhaled sharply. "I'm afraid of unnecessary complications." "There's nothing unnecessary about what happened." His patience cracked slightly then. "Mom, I said I was sorry." "No," I replied calmly. "You said you were under pressure?" Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Ethan lowered his voice. "You have no idea what's riding on this acquisition." "I know enough." His eyes sharpened immediately, meaning I held his gaze steadily, meaning I know your company isn't as stable as everyone thinks. That hit him hard. I saw it instantly. Sabrina froze. Ethan's face lost color for half a second before he recovered. "Who told you that?" "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." "Everything matters to you now except people." The words slipped out before I could stop them. For one brief second, genuine pain flashed across Ethan's face. Then pride buried it again. He pushed the folder closer toward me. "Sign the agreement." I opened it slowly this time. The amount offered was significantly larger now. Enough money to save my home. Enough money to live comfortably for years. And suddenly I understood something horrifying. My son genuinely believed there was a price for my silence. Ethan leaned closer. "This protects everyone." "No," I whispered. "It protects you." Sabrina intervened quickly. "Leslie, please try to see this rationally." Rationally. Women like Sabrina always use words like that when emotions become inconvenient. I closed the folder gently. "What happens if I refuse?" Ethan's entire body stiffened. The silence stretched long enough to become answer itself. Finally, he spoke quietly. "You don't want this turning into something public." Public. There it was. Not concern for me. Concern for headlines. Concern for investors. Concern for image. I looked at him carefully then, at the expensive suit, the strained eyes, the fear hidden beneath arrogance, and suddenly I realized Ethan wasn't powerful anymore. He was trapped inside the empire he built. I reached slowly into my purse. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. Then I placed my phone face down beside my plate, recording. The tiny red light reflected faintly against the dark screen. Neither Ethan nor Sabrina noticed, but I wanted proof, not for revenge, for truth, because powerful people rewrite conversations when fear enters the room. Ethan rubbed both hands together tightly. "Mom," he said quietly, "you should be grateful I'm trying to handle this peacefully." Grateful? Something inside me finally broke then. After everything, the sacrifices, the humiliation, the abandonment, my son believed I should feel grateful. I stared at him for several long seconds. Then I asked the question that had haunted me since Chicago. "When did you become this person?" Ethan looked away first, and that told me more than any answer ever could. At that exact moment, Richard Sloane stepped back inside from the terrace. His sharp eyes moved immediately between our faces. He sensed tension instantly. Investors always do. "Well," Richard said lightly while retaking his seat, "feels like I walked back into something important." Ethan forced a quick smile. "Just family matters." Richard studied him carefully, and for the first time all evening, I noticed uncertainty enter the investor's expression. The atmosphere at the table changed after Richard Sloane returned from the terrace. Not dramatically, not loudly, but subtly enough that everyone felt it. Richard resumed his seat with the calm confidence of a man accustomed to controlling rooms without raising his voice. He adjusted his cufflinks, lifted his wineglass, and studied Ethan carefully. My son smiled too quickly, a dangerous sign, because Ethan only overperformed confidence when he was close to losing control. Richard glanced between us. "Everything all right?" "Perfect," Ethan answered immediately. I said nothing. That silence spoke louder than any accusation could have. Dinner continued, but the illusion had cracked. Richard asked business questions while Ethan responded with polished answers, yet I noticed something new now: hesitation. Tiny pauses. A slight tightness in Ethan's jaw every time the acquisition came up. The fear was becoming visible, and once fear becomes visible to investors, everything starts unraveling. Sabrina attempted to smooth the tension with forced laughter and charming comments, but even she seemed uneasy now. She kept touching Ethan's arm beneath the table like someone trying to steady a collapsing structure. Finally, Richard set down his fork. "Mrs. Cook," he said pleasantly, "Ethan tells me you supported him a great deal early on." The table went still. Ethan's eyes snapped toward me immediately. Warning. Panic. I recognized both instantly. I folded my napkin slowly. "I did what mothers do." Richard smiled faintly. "That kind of loyalty is rare." Ethan interrupted too fast. "My mother's always been very generous." Generous? Interesting word. Not foundational, not essential, just generous. Like a kind stranger donating spare change. I looked directly at my son, then calmly said, "I mortgaged my home so Ethan could build his first company." Silence. Complete silence. Richard's expression shifted almost invisibly. Sabrina stopped moving entirely. Ethan looked furious. "Mom?" "No," I said quietly. "You wanted honesty tonight?" Richard leaned back slightly in his chair. "I didn't realize the early financing involved family collateral." Ethan forced a smile. "It was informal." My heartbeat slowed strangely then, because suddenly I understood the balance of power had changed, for days. Ethan made me feel small, powerless. But now he looked nervous every time I spoke. I reached calmly into my purse and removed several folded copies of the original documents Gloria prepared for me. Ethan's face lost color immediately. "Leslie," Sabrina whispered sharply, but I ignored her. I slid one document gently across the table toward Richard Sloane. "You may want to see this." Ethan stood so quickly his chair scraped violently against the floor. "That's enough." Richard didn't touch the paper immediately. He simply looked at Ethan, and in that moment something invisible passed between them. Not conversation. Evaluation. Richard Sloane suddenly wasn't seeing a brilliant CEO anymore. He was seeing risk. Slowly, Richard picked up the document. His eyes scanned the page once, then again. The room became unbearably quiet. Ethan's breathing had changed now, shallow, tight. "Richard," he said carefully, "these are outdated preliminary filings." Richard ignored him. He continued reading. I watched Ethan closely during those seconds, and for the first time since arriving in Chicago, my son looked exactly like the frightened little boy he used to be, except now the fear came from potentially losing money instead of monsters beneath a bed. Finally, Richard lowered the document carefully onto the table. "When exactly were you planning to disclose this structure?" Ethan's voice sharpened instantly. "It's legally insignificant. That's not what I asked." Sabrina stepped in quickly. "I think this conversation is becoming unnecessarily hostile." Richard looked at her once. That single glance silenced her completely. Men like Richard Sloane didn't become billionaires by tolerating distractions. He returned his attention to Ethan. Was legal counsel aware of this original guarantor structure? Ethan hesitated. Tiny pause. Tiny mistake. Richard noticed immediately. So did I. My son was unraveling. "I was handling disclosure timing strategically," Ethan answered carefully. Strategically. Such a clean corporate word for concealment. Richard's face hardened slightly. Strategically, Ethan rubbed his forehead. "This changes nothing operationally. It changes transparency." The tension in the room became suffocating. I almost pitied Ethan then. Almost. Because beneath all the arrogance and cruelty, I suddenly saw the truth clearly. My son had built a life entirely dependent on appearances, and appearances collapse fast once reality enters the room. Richard turned toward me again. "Mrs. Cook, are you currently pursuing legal claims?" I answered honestly. No. Ethan exhaled slightly in relief. Then I continued. But I'm trying to understand why my son erased my role in building his company. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Pain crossed his face. Real pain this time. Not business fear, human pain. Mom. His voice cracked slightly. That single broken syllable nearly shattered me, because for one terrible moment I saw my little boy again beneath the expensive suit and ego. But then pride returned. Always pride. You're making this much bigger than it is? I stared at him in disbelief. Bigger than what losing my home while my son lives in a penthouse, Sabrina stood abruptly. This is emotional manipulation. I turned toward her slowly. No, I said calmly. This is what accountability sounds like when wealthy people aren't used to hearing it. Her face flushed instantly. Richard remained silent, watching, calculating. Then Ethan finally snapped. You think I owe you everything? The anger in his voice shocked even him. I looked at him quietly. No, I whispered. I think you owe me humanity. That sentence hit harder than shouting ever could, because Ethan immediately looked away. Deep down, he knew. He knew exactly what he had become. Richard stood slowly from the table. I think we should postpone further acquisition discussions. Ethan's head jerked upward instantly. Richard, I need my legal team reviewing every foundational document connected to this company. The fear that crossed Ethan's face then was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Pure panic. Years of carefully built control slipping through his fingers in real time. This is completely unnecessary, Ethan argued quickly. No, Richard replied calmly. What's unnecessary is surprises. Sabrina moved toward Ethan immediately after Richard walked away to make a phone call. Oh my God, she hissed quietly. Do something. Do something. Not fix things with your mother, not. Tell the truth. Just protect the money. Ethan looked trapped. Sweat glistened faintly near his temples despite the cool penthouse air. And suddenly I no longer felt intimidated by the luxury surrounding him, because I finally understood something important. The penthouse, the investors, the designer suits, the power. All of it rested on foundations my sacrifices helped build. And Ethan knew it now too. I stood slowly from the table. I should go. Ethan looked up immediately. Mom, wait. The desperation in his voice startled me. Not love, fear, still fear. I picked up my purse carefully. Then I looked directly into my son's eyes. You told me you built your life yourself. He said nothing. Now you're terrified people might discover the truth. Tears filled Ethan's eyes briefly before he blinked them away angrily. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I watched my powerful, wealthy son look small. Very small. The fallout began faster than even Gloria expected. Within 48 hours of the dinner at Ethan's penthouse, the acquisition talks slowed dramatically. Lawyers became involved. Audits expanded. Financial analysts started requesting documents that Ethan clearly never planned to share. And once wealthy investors smell instability, they circle it like sharks sensing blood. I was back in Cleveland by then, staying temporarily in Gloria's guest room while trying to process everything that had happened. Every morning I woke with the same strange mixture of emotions: relief, guilt, sadness, fear. Part of me still couldn't believe my own son had become someone capable of treating me that way. Another part finally stopped making excuses for him. One rainy afternoon, Gloria walked into the kitchen holding her tablet with the expression of someone carrying bad news. Well, she muttered, the cracks are spreading. I looked up from my coffee. What happened? She slid the tablet across the table. A financial news article filled the screen. Questions emerge surrounding Ethan Cook's tech acquisition. My stomach tightened immediately. The article didn't mention me by name yet, but it referenced undisclosed early-stage financial entanglements connected to original company formation. Corporate language, cold language. But beneath it sat a simple truth: Ethan was losing control of the narrative. I stared at the screen quietly. I never wanted this public. Gloria sat across from me with a sigh. Leslie, public exposure was inevitable. The second investors realized information had been withheld. I still feel responsible. No, she said firmly. You feel maternal. That's different. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed violently against the kitchen counter. Ethan. Again. The third call that morning alone. I hesitated before answering. Hello? His voice sounded rough, tired, almost frantic. What did you tell Sloan? I told him the truth. You blindsided me. The accusation shocked me. I blindsided you. You humiliated me in front of investors. I stared out the rain-covered kitchen window in disbelief. Humiliated. That word again. Everything for Ethan revolved around humiliation now. Image, perception, reputation. Not morality, not love, not loyalty. Do you know what humiliation feels like? I asked softly. Silence. Then Ethan exhaled sharply. This is spiraling completely out of control. I closed my eyes briefly. What did you expect after abandoning your mother? That's not what happened. The speed of his response stunned me. Not because he defended himself, because he genuinely believed it. People tell themselves astonishing lies when protecting their egos. You handed me cash and sent me into the street. I offered help. You offered silence. Another pause, then his voice lowered dangerously. Do you understand how many people this affects? There it is again, I whispered. What money before humanity? His breathing became heavier. You think this is simple? Hundreds of employees depend on this company. That sentence hit harder than he intended. Because for the first time, I heard genuine fear underneath his arrogance. Not fear of losing luxury, fear of collapse. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. What's really happening? Ethan's silence stretched too long. Then finally, cash reserves are low. I looked toward Gloria instinctively. She immediately straightened, listening carefully. Ethan continued quietly. The acquisition delay triggered problems. What kind of problems? Investors are nervous? How nervous? He laughed bitterly. You really want the truth? Yes. A long pause. Then, if Sloan pulls out completely, we may not survive 6 months. The room suddenly felt colder. I gripped the phone tighter. How bad is it bad? For the first time in weeks, Ethan sounded less like a CEO and more like a frightened child standing in the ruins of his own decisions. I should have felt victorious. Instead, grief settled heavily inside me. Because no matter how cruel Ethan became, he was still my son. I never wanted your company destroyed, I whispered. Then why are you doing this? The exhaustion in his voice almost broke me. Because you left me with nothing. Silence. Then finally quieter than before. I know. Those 2 words stunned me. Not defensive, not arrogant, just tired. I almost spoke gently then, almost reached back toward him emotionally, but before I could, another voice interrupted faintly in the background. Sabrina? I couldn't hear everything clearly, but I heard enough. Are you seriously begging her now? Something inside me hardened instantly. Ethan muttered something back to her, then returned to the phone, sounding colder again. We need to settle this privately before it gets worse. There he was again, the businessman. Always returning. What does privately mean? I'll increase the settlement. I closed my eyes. Even now, he still thought money solved betrayal. I don't want more money, Ethan. Everyone wants money. The sentence came automatically, like a reflex, and suddenly I understood the tragedy completely. My son had spent so many years surrounded by wealth investors and opportunists that he no longer believed love could exist without transactions. No, I whispered. Not everyone. He said nothing. Then quietly, Sabrina thinks you're trying to destroy me. I laughed sadly. Sabrina doesn't know me. She thinks Gloria's manipulating you. That one actually angered me. No, I snapped. Gloria is the first person who treated me like I mattered. Silence again. Then Ethan spoke softly. You always make me feel like the villain. The vulnerability in that sentence startled me, because beneath all the arrogance, he still needed absolution. I swallowed hard. Do you know what hurts most? What you never once asked me how I survived after losing everything. His breathing caught slightly. I continued quietly. You never asked where I slept. Silence. You never asked whether I was scared. Longer silence, then finally broken and quiet. I didn't know how to face you. Tears burned behind my eyes immediately, because that sounded honest, painfully honest. For one brief moment I heard my son again. Not the CEO, not the wealthy executive, just Ethan. The little boy who used to cry after disappointing me. But honesty arrived too late. Sometimes love survives betrayal. Trust doesn't. The call ended awkwardly a few minutes later with no resolution. No apology, no peace. Just exhaustion. Afterward, Gloria sat across from me silently. Finally, she spoke. He's collapsing emotionally. I nodded faintly. He sounds scared. He should be. She folded her arms carefully. But there's something else happening too. What he's beginning to realize success didn't erase what he owes you. I stared down at my cold coffee quietly. Outside, rain continued falling over Cleveland in soft gray waves. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Ethan. It was Tyler Reed, the assistant. His text message was short. You need to know something. Sabrina is preparing Ethan to fight you publicly. A second message appeared immediately after, and I don't think Ethan understands how ugly this is about to become. Tyler's warning turned out to be true. 3 days later, Ethan sued me. Even now, saying those words feels unreal. My own son filed legal action against me. The official claim accused me of interfering with corporate operations, damaging investor confidence, and intentionally threatening the stability of his company for personal financial gain. Cold words, legal words. But beneath them sat a deeper accusation: greedy mother attacks successful son. The headlines came quickly after that. Local CEO faces family. Dispute during major acquisition, questions rise about motives of company founder's mother. Some articles stayed neutral, others didn't. Social media was worse. People who knew nothing about me suddenly had opinions about my character. She waited until he got rich. She's manipulating him emotionally. This is why successful people cut toxic family off. One comment hit especially hard: nobody owes their parents lifelong support. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Because technically, maybe it was true. Children do not owe parents luxury, but kindness, human decency. Surely those things still mattered. The worst part wasn't the public judgment. It was seeing Ethan allow it. He never defended me publicly, not once. He let strangers paint me as a bitter old woman trying to extort her wealthy son while he hid behind corporate silence. And somehow, that hurt more than the lawsuit itself. One afternoon, I sat in Gloria's office while television news quietly played in the background. A financial anchor discussed Ethan's company with forced professionalism. Sources close to the situation claim the dispute involves early-stage funding agreements and alleged emotional coercion. Emotional coercion. I laughed bitterly. Apparently, mothers sacrificing everything for their children becomes manipulation once money enters the conversation. Gloria muted the television sharply. Stop watching this garbage. I just don't understand how we got here. She softened slightly. Power changes people. No, I whispered. Fear changes people. And Ethan was terrified now. I could feel it beneath every legal filing and public statement. Because lawsuits aren't always weapons. Sometimes they're panic attacks written by attorneys. Still, panic can destroy people just as effectively as cruelty. The stress began affecting my health quickly. I stopped eating properly again. Sleep disappeared almost entirely. Every morning I woke with heaviness pressing against my chest. My hands trembled constantly now, especially whenever my phone rang. Gloria noticed before I admitted it. You look exhausted. I'm fine. No, she said firmly. You look heartbroken. That was the real truth. Not angry, not vindictive. Heartbroken. Because no legal document could erase the image burned into my memory. Ethan as a little boy, asleep on my chest during thunderstorms. Ethan holding my hand at Michael's funeral. Ethan promising, one day I'll take care of you, Mom. How does someone travel from that innocence to suing his own mother? One evening, unable to sleep again, I finally returned to my house in Cleveland for the first time since everything exploded publicly. The foreclosure process had slowed temporarily because Gloria managed to negotiate extensions using the pending legal complications surrounding Ethan's company. But the house itself felt different now. Too quiet, too fragile. Dust floated through dim evening light as I walked room to room alone. Every object carried memory: Michael's old reading chair, the hallway where Ethan marked his height with pencil lines every birthday, the kitchen table where we once laughed over burnt pancakes because we couldn't afford restaurant breakfast back then. I stood there for a long time staring at those faded pencil marks on the wall. Age 8, age 10, age 13. Tiny pieces of childhood frozen in wood and paint. Tears blurred my vision suddenly. How did we lose each other? I whispered into the empty house. No answer came. Just silence. I eventually climbed the attic stairs searching for old tax records Gloria requested. Dust coated everything heavily up there. Cardboard boxes filled with decades of forgotten life surrounded me beneath weak overhead lighting. I searched mechanically at first, then I found something unexpected. A small sealed envelope tucked inside one of Michael's old toolboxes. My name written across the front. Leslie. My breath caught instantly. I recognized Michael's handwriting immediately. My hands began shaking before I even opened it. Inside sat several folded pages yellowed slightly with age. And at the top, if you're reading this, I'm probably already gone. The attic suddenly felt too small to breathe inside. I sat slowly onto the floor, surrounded by old boxes and trembling shadows, while reading Michael's words. Leslie, I know you better than anyone, which means I know that after I'm gone, you'll destroy yourself trying to carry everything alone. Please don't. Ethan is brilliant, but brilliance scares me sometimes. Not because he's bad, because ambition can convince good people they no longer need kindness. Tears fell instantly onto the paper. Michael saw it before any of us. He continued, if Ethan becomes successful one day, promise me you won't disappear inside his success. Promise me you'll remember your sacrifices mattered too. I covered my mouth to stop myself from crying aloud. Every sentence felt like Michael reaching through time. Then came the line that shattered me completely, and if our son ever forgets who stood beside him when he had nothing, remind him gently before life reminds him cruelly. I broke then. Completely. Not graceful tears, not quiet sadness, the kind of grief that bends your body in half. Because suddenly I understood something devastating. Michael had feared this long before I ever imagined it possible. Not because Ethan lacked love, because unchecked ambition slowly erodes empathy, especially in people constantly rewarded for winning. I kept reading. Toward the end, Michael referenced the startup investment specifically, the house, the savings, the risk. We gave those things willingly because family means building together, not ownership, not debt, together. I sat there in the attic crying, quietly while the old house creaked around me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I stopped feeling ashamed, because Michael's letter reminded me of something I had forgotten. I was never trying to steal Ethan's success. I helped create it. Hours later, I finally returned downstairs carrying the letter carefully against my chest. My phone buzzed again. Another news alert. Another story about Ethan's lawsuit. But this time, instead of fear, I felt clarity. Because somewhere beneath all the money, headlines, lawyers, and public humiliation, the truth still existed. And soon Ethan was going to hear his father's words, whether he was ready or not. The mediation hearing took place on a freezing Monday morning in downtown Chicago. Not a courtroom exactly, but close enough to feel terrifying. The conference room sat on the 32nd floor of a glass office tower overlooking the city. Everything inside felt aggressively corporate steel marble, polished silence. A long table divided the room down the middle, one side for Ethan and his legal team, one side for Gloria and me. I arrived early wearing the same navy blue coat Michael bought me years ago for our anniversary. The sleeves had begun fraying near the wrists, but I wore it anyway because somehow it made me feel less alone. Gloria reviewed documents beside me calmly while I stared out the giant windows. Snow drifted slowly over Chicago. Beautiful from a distance. Cold when you're inside it. You ready? Gloria asked softly. No, she smiled faintly. Good. People who feel too ready for war usually lose themselves in it. A few minutes later, Ethan entered. And my heart broke all over again. He looked terrible. Not physically ruined, just hollowed out. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His expensive suit hung slightly loose now, and the sharp confidence he once carried everywhere seemed fractured around the edges. For one brief second after spotting me, something vulnerable crossed his face. Regret. Then Sabrina entered behind him, and the walls went back up immediately. Sabrina looked immaculate as always. Cream-colored designer coat, perfect hair, perfect makeup. The kind of woman who appeared untouched by stress because people like her learned long ago how to weaponize appearance. She leaned close to Ethan and whispered something quietly. Instantly, his expression hardened again. The lawyers began discussing procedural details I barely understood. Settlement possibilities, disclosure concerns, investor liabilities. Cold language. None of it sounded remotely connected to motherhood anymore. I sat there silently listening to strangers discuss my family like a damaged corporation. Finally, the mediator, a tired older man named Harold, cleared his throat. Mrs. Cook, he said gently, what outcome are you seeking today? Every face in the room turned toward me, even Ethan's, for several seconds. I couldn't speak, because honestly I still didn't fully know. What exactly was the value of betrayal? How do you calculate the cost of being abandoned by your own child? Finally, I answered quietly, I wanted acknowledgement. Sabrina shifted impatiently. Harold nodded carefully. Acknowledgement of what I looked directly at Ethan. That I mattered before he became successful. Silence. Heavy silence. Ethan rubbed his jaw tightly. His lead attorney quickly stepped in, with respect. Emotional grievances cannot interfere with legitimate corporate operations. There it was again. Emotion treated like weakness, like inconvenience. Like something embarrassing older women were expected to suppress quietly. Gloria leaned forward immediately. With respect, she replied, "Coolly, corporate operations were built partially on my client's financial sacrifices." The attorney opened his mouth again, but Gloria cut him off sharply. "And unlike your client, Mrs. Cook has actual documentation supporting her role." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Embarrassment flashed across his face. Not because the documents existed, because the truth was being spoken aloud in front of witnesses. The mediator raised both hands carefully. "Let's stay constructive." Constructive. Interesting word for a family collapse. After another hour of negotiations going nowhere, Harold finally suggested a short recess. People scattered around the room immediately. Lawyers took calls, assistants carried paperwork. Sabrina pulled Ethan toward the far windows and whispered intensely in his ear. Then something unexpected happened. Tyler Reed approached me quietly. "Mrs. Cook?" I looked up. He seemed nervous again. Worse than before? What is it? Tyler glanced toward Ethan to make sure he wasn't watching, then lowered his voice. "Mr. Sloan froze the acquisition completely this morning." My stomach tightened. "Completely," he nodded. "There's talk about leadership instability now." Leadership instability. Such a sterile phrase for emotional collapse. Tyler swallowed hard. Some board members are questioning Ethan privately. I looked toward my son instinctively. He stood near the windows, arguing softly with Sabrina while snow swirled behind them. For the first time, he didn't look powerful. He looked cornered. And suddenly I remembered Ethan at 16, after totaling Michael's truck accidentally. He stood in the driveway, terrified to face his father, pacing exactly the same way he paced now. Funny how fear preserves certain gestures across decades. Tyler hesitated before speaking again. "I don't think he expected any of this." "No," I whispered sadly. "He expected me to stay silent." Tyler looked down. Then quietly, "He's not sleeping." Something inside my chest twisted painfully. Even now, even after everything, he was still my son. When mediation resumed, Ethan seemed more agitated than before. He barely looked at me directly. Harold sighed heavily after another failed legal exchange. At this point, he muttered, "I think we're avoiding the actual issue." Nobody answered. Then Harold surprised everyone. "Mrs. Cook," he asked gently, "if there's something you need your son to hear, now would probably be the time." The room went completely still. My hands trembled slightly as I reached into my purse and removed Michael's letter. Ethan noticed immediately. His expression changed instantly. "What's that?" I unfolded the worn pages carefully. "This is from your father." The color drained from Ethan's face. Sabrina looked annoyed, but Ethan suddenly looked afraid. Real fear, not business fear, emotional fear. I began reading softly. "If you're reading this, I'm probably already gone." The room disappeared around me as Michael's words filled the silence. Line after line cut deeper. About sacrifice, about family, about ambition, about kindness. And then I reached the part that shattered everything. "Leslie, if our son ever forgets who stood beside him when he had nothing, remind him gently before life reminds him cruelly." My voice cracked badly, across the table. Ethan stared downward, motionless. I continued reading. "The house, the savings, the risk. We gave those things willingly because family means building together. Building together." The words echoed painfully through the room. "Then finally, success means nothing if it costs you the people who loved you before you earned it." Silence followed. No lawyers speaking, no papers moving, nothing. I looked up slowly. Ethan was crying, not dramatically, not loudly, just silent tears sliding down his face while he stared at the table. And suddenly he looked young again. Not 38, not wealthy, just lost. Sabrina touched his arm quickly. "Ethan!" He pulled away from her immediately. That startled everyone, especially Sabrina. Ethan covered his mouth with one hand, breathing unevenly. My dad wrote that I nodded slowly. He closed his eyes tightly, then whispered something so quietly I almost didn't hear it. I became exactly what he feared. The sentence broke something open inside the room. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan stopped defending himself, stopped performing, stopped hiding behind money and lawyers and corporate language. He simply looked devastated. And honestly, that hurt me more than his cruelty ever had. Because I finally saw the truth clearly. My son wasn't evil. He was hollow. He spent so many years chasing success that he forgot how to recognize love unless it came wrapped in achievement. And now the cost of that emptiness stood directly in front of him, crying, holding his father's final words. Everything unraveled after the mediation. Not all at once, but steadily. Like a luxury building developing cracks beneath the foundation, nobody wanted to inspect too closely. Within 2 weeks, Richard Sloan officially withdrew from the acquisition. The statement released to financial media used polished corporate language due to unresolved structural and leadership concerns. Sloan Capital has elected not to proceed with the current transaction, but everyone understood what it really meant. Ethan's empire had been wounded publicly, and in the world he built, perception was survival. Investors began distancing themselves. Board members demanded emergency meetings. Employees leaked rumors online. For the first time in his career, Ethan no longer controlled the story being told about him. Meanwhile, the lawsuit quietly disappeared. No dramatic announcement, no apology. His attorneys simply requested dismissal during settlement negotiations. Gloria handled most of it while I sat silently through meeting after meeting, feeling emotionally exhausted beyond words. In the end, Ethan agreed to recognize my documented financial role in the company's original foundation, legally, officially. A settlement awarded me a substantial amount of money and a percentage connected to early intellectual property structures. More money than I ever imagined having. Enough to save my house, enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. But, strangely, I felt almost nothing when the paperwork was finalized, because by then this stopped being about money. It became about mourning. Mourning the relationship we used to have. Mourning the son I thought I knew. Mourning the year's success slowly hollowed out parts of him neither of us noticed disappearing. One evening after the settlement concluded, Gloria and I sat quietly in my kitchen drinking tea while snow fell outside. The foreclosure notice had finally been withdrawn. My house was safe. For the first time in months, I could breathe again. "You won," Gloria said softly. I stared into my tea. "Does this feel like winning to you?" She didn't answer immediately. Finally, no. That honesty comforted me more than false optimism would have, because some battles don't leave victors, just survivors. News about Ethan continued spreading online over the following weeks. Financial blogs questioned his leadership. Articles criticized his handling of family-related disclosure concerns. Former employees began speaking anonymously about toxic work culture inside the company. And slowly, quietly, the perfect image Ethan spent years constructing began collapsing. Then Sabrina left him. Tyler told me first. Apparently, she moved out of the penthouse while Ethan attended emergency meetings with investors. No dramatic goodbye, no loyalty, just gone. I wish I could say I felt satisfaction hearing that. I didn't. Only sadness. Because despite everything, part of me still remembered the excitement in Ethan's voice years ago when he first called me from Chicago. "Mom, people finally believe in me." Back then, success still made him joyful. Before it made him afraid. A week later, I returned to Chicago one final time to sign remaining settlement documents. The city looked different now. Or maybe I did. When I entered Ethan's building again, nobody mistook me for housekeeping anymore. The receptionist stood immediately. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Cook. Respect." Amazing how quickly the world offers respect once money becomes attached to your name. Upstairs. The penthouse felt unrecognizable, still luxurious, still beautiful, but empty now. Cold in a different way. No music, no laughter, no Sabrina, no investors, just silence. Ethan stood near the windows wearing jeans and a plain gray sweater instead of expensive tailored suits. He looked thinner, older somehow. When he turned toward me, I noticed something shocking. Relief. Relief that I came at all. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi." The distance between us felt enormous despite standing only a few feet apart. He gestured awkwardly toward the dining area. "There's coffee." I nodded politely. For several minutes, we discussed paperwork with Gloria and the attorneys present. Final signatures, asset clarifications, settlement terms, corporate endings to deeply personal wounds. Eventually, the lawyers left to finalize copies downstairs. Then it was just Ethan and me alone in the penthouse. Again. Except this time, everything had changed. The city glowed beyond the giant windows while evening settled slowly over Chicago. Ethan stared downward at his untouched coffee. I lost Sloan. I nodded once. I know. 3 board members resigned yesterday. His voice sounded numb, not dramatic, just tired. I know. Silence settled heavily between us. Finally, he laughed softly. Not happy laughter. Broken laughter. I used to think this place meant I made it. I looked around the massive penthouse. The marble. The skyline. The expensive emptiness. What does it mean now? He swallowed hard before answering. That I built a life too expensive to tell the truth inside. The honesty in that sentence stunned me. For once, Ethan wasn't performing. He wasn't selling. He wasn't defending himself. He was simply exhausted. I walked slowly toward the windows overlooking Chicago. Snow drifted softly beneath the city lights. You know what hurts most? I asked quietly. Ethan looked up immediately. I never cared about the money. Pain crossed his face instantly. I know that now. I wanted my son. His eyes filled again. Not dramatic tears this time, just grief. I thought if I became successful enough... His voice cracked slightly. People would finally respect me. I turned toward him slowly. Who taught you that love had to be earned through success? He looked away immediately, and suddenly I understood. Not because Michael or I taught him intentionally, but because Ethan grew up watching us struggle financially after Michael got sick. He watched stress consume our home, watched bills pile up, watched fear humiliate us. Somewhere deep inside himself, he decided money meant safety, control, worth. And once that belief rooted itself deeply enough, he began sacrificing humanity to protect it. I became scared of losing everything he admitted quietly. And so you threw away the people who loved you before you had anything. He nodded once, unable to deny it anymore. The silence afterward felt strangely peaceful, not healed, but honest. Finally, Ethan reached into a drawer beside the kitchen counter. When he turned back, he held the old cardboard photo box, the same one I carried into Chicago weeks earlier. I found this after you left the first night, he said softly. I stared at the box silently. His fingers rested carefully against the worn cardboard edges. I spent hours looking through it. Emotion tightened my throat immediately. There are things inside I forgot existed. I smiled sadly. That's the problem with success, Ethan. He looked up. It makes people forget the years before applause. Tears slipped quietly down his face then, and for the first time since this nightmare began, my son didn't wipe them away. 6 months later, I left Cleveland. Not because I was running away. For the first time in years, I was finally running towards something. I moved to a small lakeside town along the shore of Lake Michigan, the kind of place where mornings smell like fresh coffee and water, where people still wave from porches, and where sunsets slow everything down enough for you to breathe again. The house I bought wasn't large, just a white cottage with blue shutters and creaky wooden floors. But it felt peaceful, and after everything that happened with Ethan, peace mattered more to me than luxury ever could. I used part of the settlement money to create something Michael would have loved. A support center for women over 55 who lost jobs later in life. Women like me. Women discarded by companies after decades of loyalty. Women quietly drowning beneath medical bills, loneliness, foreclosure notices, and shame. I called it the Harbor House, because that's what I wanted it to be. A harbor for women who felt abandoned by the world. The center started small. A rented office near the lake. Free resume workshops. Financial counseling. Coffee groups twice a week. Then slowly stories began pouring in. A 60-year-old teacher replaced by younger staff. A widow working grocery shifts after losing retirement savings. A grandmother living in her car after medical debt destroyed her finances. Every woman carried the same invisible wound, feeling no longer valuable, and every time they sat across from me crying softly into paper coffee cups, I saw pieces of myself in them. One afternoon, a woman named Carol grabbed my hands after a support meeting. "You make people feel seen again," she whispered. I cried in my car afterward, because for so long, I believed my worth ended the moment I lost my job. But somehow pain had led me somewhere meaningful. Life does that sometimes. It breaks your heart open just enough for purpose to enter. As for Ethan, for a while we barely spoke, not out of hatred, out of caution. Some wounds need quiet before healing becomes possible. He stepped down temporarily as CEO 3 months after the failed acquisition. Publicly, the company described it as leadership restructuring. Privately, Ethan was exhausted, emotionally, financially, spiritually. Tyler kept me updated occasionally. Apparently, Ethan sold the penthouse shortly after Sabrina left. Most of the luxury lifestyle disappeared with shocking speed once investors stopped worshiping him. Funny how quickly wealth exposes fake loyalty. But what surprised me most was this: Ethan stopped chasing attention afterward. No interviews, no flashy appearances, no social media showcasing private jets and rooftop parties. It was almost like losing everything forced him to hear himself think for the first time in years. Then one October evening, just as the trees near the lake turned deep shades of gold and red, someone knocked on my front door. I already knew who it was before opening it. Mothers always know. Ethan stood on the porch wearing a dark jacket and holding the old cardboard photo box against his chest. No luxury car waited behind him, no driver, no assistant, just Ethan. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The wind coming off the lake moved softly through the trees, while sunset painted warm orange light across the porch. Finally, he looked down and said quietly, "I almost turned around 3 times." I smiled faintly. I almost didn't open the door. That actually made him laugh softly. A real laugh, small, human. I stepped aside. "Come in." The cottage suddenly felt tiny with him inside it. Not physically, emotionally, like the years between us had followed him through the doorway. He looked around slowly. "It's beautiful here. It's peaceful." He nodded quietly. I think I forgot what peaceful feels like. We sat in the kitchen drinking coffee while evening settled outside. No lawyers, no contracts, no investors, just silence and history sitting between us. Eventually, Ethan placed the photo box carefully on the table. I kept looking through these. I opened the box slowly. Inside sat all the old memories. Birthday cards, photos, Michael's handwritten notes, and right on top, a picture of Ethan at age 8 wearing an oversized winter coat while holding my hand outside our old Cleveland house. I touched the photo gently. "You used to hate that coat." Ethan smiled sadly. "You made me wear it anyway. You looked like a walking marshmallow." He laughed again, then suddenly stopped. Tears filled his eyes almost immediately afterward. "I don't know how to fix what I did." There it was. The truth. Not excuses, not business language, just regret. I looked at my son carefully, really looked at him. The arrogance was gone now. So was the performance. What remained looked painfully human. "I'm not sure you fully can," I answered honestly. He nodded slowly. "I know." Silence settled again. Then Ethan whispered something that shattered me completely. "When you showed up at the penthouse," his voice cracked. "I saw where I came from, and instead of feeling grateful, I felt terrified. I stayed quiet. Not because of you," he continued quickly, "because I spent years convincing myself I'd escaped being powerless." Tears slid down his face freely now, and I became cruel trying to protect that illusion. The honesty hurt. Because it was true, I reached across the table slowly and covered his hand with mine. Not because everything was healed, because love still existed despite the damage. "You were never powerless, Ethan." He looked up. "You just forgot who stood beside you." He broke completely then, crying openly. The same way he cried after Michael died. The same way he cried as a little boy during thunderstorms. Some griefs bring people back to themselves. We talked for hours that night. About Michael, about fear, about ambition, about loneliness. And before Ethan left, I told him something important. "I forgive you," I said softly. "But forgiveness and trust are not the same thing." Pain crossed his face, but he nodded. "I understand. And things will never go back to the way they were." "I know." That was the moment I realized Ethan had finally grown. Not when he became wealthy, not when magazines wrote about him, not when investors praised him. He grew the moment he stopped defending the worst thing he had done. At the door he paused before leaving, then quietly asked, "Do you think Dad would still be disappointed in me?" I looked toward the lake outside before answering. "I think your father would be proud you finally remembered what matters." Ethan cried again hearing that, and after he drove away into the quiet Michigan night. I stood alone on the porch, listening to the water move gently beneath the moonlight. For the first time in years, I no longer felt abandoned. I finally understood something life had been trying to teach me all along. I was never a burden. I was the foundation. Show more, show less. Sometimes life teaches us the hardest lessons through the people we love the most. Leslie's story is not really about money, success, or lawsuits. It is about what happens when gratitude disappears and ambition becomes more important than human connection. So many parents spend their entire lives sacrificing quietly working exhausting jobs, giving up dreams, hiding their own pain, all to build a better future for their children. But somewhere along the way, many people forget the hands that carried them when they were weak. What makes this story so painful is that Ethan was not born cruel. He became lost. He allowed fear, status, and success to slowly replace empathy. And honestly, that happens more often than people realize. The world teaches us to chase achievement so aggressively that we sometimes forget kindness is part of success too. A beautiful house means nothing if there is no warmth inside it. Wealth means nothing if the people who loved you before you had money no longer recognize your heart. But this story is also about healing. Leslie did not destroy her son. She did something far more powerful. She finally remembered her own worth. She stopped begging to be valued and began building a life where her compassion, wisdom, and strength could help others. And in the end, Ethan's greatest loss was never the penthouse or the business deal. It was realizing how close he came to losing the one person who loved him unconditionally. Maybe that is the real lesson here. Success without gratitude becomes emptiness. But love, humility, and accountability still have the power to bring people home to themselves. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced pain, disappointment, or healing within your own family? And where are you watching from today? Your stories mean more than you know, and they remind others they are not alone. If you enjoy emotional family dramas like this, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing meaningful stories together.